Thanks to all of you for coming out. I know it's a bit cold outside and it's Halloween and there's also other things going on, so thank you for taking an hour out of your time to come along to the Union tonight for what should be a really, really interesting talk. The format is sort of our classic way of going about things, so Georgina will be speaking for about for a little period of time. I'm going to then do some questions, but then we really want to have a nice dialogue with the floor tonight, so think up your questions, and then we can have a nice free-flowing chat towards the end of the session. Just to provide a little bit of bio, Georgina Beyer is our speaker tonight. She's a New Zealand politician and a leading LGBT plus activist. After a brief spell as an actor and a sex worker in the 1980s, she was elected Mayor of Carterton in 1995, becoming the world's first transsexual mayor. With her victory in the 1999 general election, she secured another first. She was elected as the world's first transsexual MP. I've got to provide a few acknowledgements because it's taken a really good effort from lots of different organisations to get Georgina over to the UK. So Air New Zealand and Auckland Pride have been really, really helpful. And Georgina would also like to acknowledge the Chrissy Wikato Trust. I think, did I pronounce that all right? Oh, great. Kim Young from the Ministry of Women's Affairs, Mal Vaughan and Scott Kennedy from S&M's Bar, and Pat McIntosh and Val Little for organising the Give a Little campaign, and also everyone who donated. So hopefully you'll all get that via the YouTube and you'll know how appreciative we all are. Anyhow, without further ado, can we all give a massive round of applause for Georgina? Hi, amazing. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Hi.
Perfect. So I'm just wondering whether you could kick off just by talking a little bit about your story and I suppose how you've got to where you are today.
Yes, well, how long have we got? Quite a while. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for all coming here tonight to partake in this. My life, boy. Okay, grew up conventionally in a sort of middle-class family, relatively good education. My transsexuality began to manifest, and it's fairly similar for many other transgender people who I've met, from quite a young age, about 4 or 5 years of age. Manifest, I mean by that, I seemed to err towards things feminine rather than masculine, and so the dress-up box was a sort of a good start. Adults around me, when they saw this kind of behaviour happening, considered it to be sort of cute and fun. But when I got a little older, of course, they thought, because they might have thought this was just a phase that would pass, but it didn't. It remained. And so 6, 7, 8 years of age, when I was still doing this kind of thing, then came the trying to condition it out of me. Essentially, it was abuse. It would be strong words, followed by a clip over the ear, a kick in the backside, the occasional hiding, a bit of a thrashing. One soon learnt not to be so overt about it and just sort of suppress it, but it didn't get rid of the behaviour, I can tell you that. I just became more deceitful about it and did it secretively. And and I had no idea what this compulsion was, too young to understand anything about gender or anything like that. It's just the way I was. But I outwardly tried to be the boy I was meant to be and do all the right things and behave the right way and play the right sports, which I hated, and go out hunting with uncles, which I hated, but I grinned and bared it. When I was old enough to take more control of my own life, that is in my teenage years, school was another place where bullying and those sorts of aspects would occur, so I just disguised it. One thing I did do, where it seemed to be permissible, was I was in the choir. I went to church and Sunday school and things like that, but in the choir, you got to wear something that was like a dress, and it had frilly collars. And so that was sort of satisfying, if I can put it that way, and it was all very acceptable. Now we know, as we look at some of the churches around the place, yes. But, nonetheless, that, and I took up an interest in amateur theatre, drama, acting, and things like that. Another place where one could apply makeup, wear period costumes that were, vaguely frock-like or whatever, in that sense. Play the dame in pantomimes, and of course being able to dress up like that where it was permissible and seen as great entertainment and wonderful fun. But for me it had some more fundamental meaning for me. It meant I could be more who I am and in a place of more acceptance about it. But always that, when the curtain fell, it was back into into the conventional boyhood lifestyle. I left school at the age of 16. I had intentions of going to the New Zealand Drama School, which was located in Wellington, our capital city in New Zealand, and I thought I could pursue a career then, but of course I was way too young to be accepted into drama school, so I just hung around all the budding actors and actresses and the teachers of drama and all of that. A very bad sort of fangirl kind of person, really. But strangely enough, it got me into television. And I ended up in a soap opera we had in New Zealand called Close to Home, and where I had to play the boyfriend of one of the core cast characters. And it was during this period that I had met some people who were going to become very important in my life. They happened to be gay, and I ended up flatting with them. And they took me to a drag show, and the club was owned by a very famous New Zealand transgender woman called Madam Carmen. And it was the first time I had actually seen transgender women on stage who had breasts. They looked beautiful, and once I saw there was a pathway, I never looked back. And I essentially dived into the abyss. Nothing was ever going to change my trajectory into becoming who I needed to be. I had to be. What I didn't realise at that age, and in diving into the abyss, was the immense amount of social disapproval over this kind of thing. Institutional discrimination. I'll just finish off on the television thing first. So there I was, week in, week out on TV, playing the boyfriend of this girl, but in the weekends I was going out in drag with my friends, since I had now discovered, and I was experimenting, I suppose, in how I was going to develop my look, my style, and all of that kind of thing. I was a bit amateur at it to begin with, but soon came around. Well, anyhow, members of the public saw me prancing around in drag on the weekends and wrote letters of complaint to the director of the show, and I got hauled into the office one day and told, look, what you do in your private life is fine, but we're hearing that you're, going around dressed up in women's clothes and things on the weekend, and it's sort of not really a good look for you or for the program, really. And so if you could just tone that down, or if you could just keep it very private and not out in the public, we should be all right. And I drew a line in the sand right then and there and walked out of the show at that moment. I made a conscious decision, no, I'm afraid to be who I am is far more important than trying to be a TV star at that point. Similar kind of thing with institutional discrimination. So now I was unemployed. I couldn't get a job because they didn't want to have this queer working unless I was going to be the man I was supposed to be. The same thing was told to me at our social welfare unemployment benefit place. When I applied for an unemployment benefit, they said, look, you're perfectly capable of working, just put your trousers back on and get out there and do it. Again, I drew a line in the sand and said, no, I'm not going to do that because I can't be anything other than who I am. The social consequences of that were devastating. There were no support groupings or whatever I could go to. The doctors that I went to start on my hormone treatments and like that was so out of it on his own drugs, frankly. You know, we sort of had to go the back door way. It was very unsafe. And I only followed the advice of my other fellow trans people around me at the time of who to go to, where to get this and that, and how to get on. We had to look after ourselves. So very unsophisticated, very dangerous in lots of ways. And for a number of years, I was on a synthetic female hormone called stilbestrol. I had no idea exactly the side effects of such things other than the obvious side effects which I was wanting. But drew a lot of calcium out of your body, so your bones got brittle, and I had a car accident at some stage and I had a broken arm out of that car accident, broken arm, fixed in a couple of months. No, 6 months later, because I hadn't replaced the calcium that was being sucked out of me by these drugs. That's just a small example of some of the dangers inherent if you don't get proper advice on how to do these things. It ended up forcing me into the sex industry. And I do mean forcing me. If you honestly think that I wanted to be in the sex industry, think again. I did not. But that's where I and many others of those who are like me ended up having to make $1 to put food on the table and have a roof over your head and to make your contribution to your flat mates and, etc. and things like that. A brutal, nasty industry, as it was in those days, and for trans, the most dangerous form of earning an income you could find. In fact, street prostitution is dangerous, whatever you are, at the best of times. And so easy to get in, so much harder to get out, especially when you're living in the margins of society in a twilight world that is overlooked by general society, but targeted by the police and the authorities around you, just made our lives, and made examples of, really. You might have got, plucked off the street by the cops, put in jail on a Friday night, or in the cells at least, waiting to appear in front of the district court judge on a Monday morning, put into a men's cell, usually full of very unsavoury people. Very awful. If you'd happened to have gone out on a Friday night and you're all dressed up in your lovely clothes and your makeup and everything, by Monday morning you look like shit. And if you happened to be cursed with beard and 5 o'clock shadow stuff, you just looked awful. It was demeaning, it was dehumanising, and to front up in the front of the judge and take it, well, you just had to suck it up and deal with it. And really, for all the money I did make out of prostitution and stripping and strip clubs and things like that, I only ever got caught once and convicted of frequenting with felonious intent, deemed as a rogue and a vagabond. And I thought the $50 fine was a pretty cheap tax in the scheme of things at the end of the day. That kind of conviction no longer exists on the statute books anymore. And I regaled a similar story when we were debating the Prostitution Reform Act in the Parliament. And I was there, and of course I was the only one that could tell a story like that, because none of the others would dare. I'm sure if they had ever had anything to do with it, but that's further down the track. When I did, so in 1979, a friend and I left to go and live in Sydney, Australia, and try to get some legitimate work in a new country where nobody would sort of really know who we were. And we did succeed in getting, I got my first real legitimate job as a transgender person in a bar in King's Cross, yes, but at least I wasn't having to sell myself. I was earning legitimate money, and that felt good. It was good for the self-esteem, and I knew that I could do, stuff like that, and it was good to earn an honest dollar, if I can put it that way. Unfortunately, I made a mistake one night. I had met a couple of Kiwi guys who were in Les Girls, the famous Sydney drag show. Carlotta and all of them. A lot of that show's based on Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, is based on a lot of those people who were in that scene at that time. And they were with two Australian friends, and they invited me outside to have a joint. And I stupidly went. It was going to be the first dope I'd ever had. That's the other thing about the sex industry. You end up getting tied up in drugs and pills and alcohol and all of that sort of thing. And of course, you know, I did all of that. And so in Australia to be, invited out, two Kiwi guys, I felt safe. Well, how stupid was I? I got pack raped that night. It was brutal and nasty and soul destroying. And the aftermath of it saw me get incredibly depressed, a few suicide attempts and things like that. Luckily, and it's just luckily really, I didn't descend into absolute hopelessness and indeed suicide. I fell on the other side. I got angry. I got angry about the injustice. I got angry that I couldn't get justice to go and complain to the police, and they'd look at you and say, "You're just a dirty, filthy, Maori prostitute drag queen. What do you mean you got raped?" No sense in that, and that provided a sort of fire in the belly that this shouldn't happen to me, it shouldn't happen to anybody, and at the end of the day there should be some justice out of this for me, but there wasn't. So how was I going to change this? How was I going to change my life? And I thought the only way I could really do it is to sort of set example. I did become involved in the entertainment industry in a very good drag show in Auckland at that time, where I stayed for a number of years, and so I had my drag diva years, so to speak, but I also got involved in some filmmaking. Stories were starting to be written, real stories, that reflected a transgender person's life more realistically than some of the way we were presented in film and television and that, which was sort of mocking, really, in lots of ways. And but this particular film I became involved with, a short half-hour film called Jewel's Dow, about a day in the life of a transsexual and a transvestite who were in a platonic friendship. And just a simple look at a day in their lives. And it was sort of quite sweet, really. No sex in it, no nothing like that, yet the censor of the day decided that it would not go on television because the subject matter was contrary to the public's good taste. Okay. Anyhow, that little roadblock was overcome, and eventually that film, along with others that were in the series that went on primetime television, and that was sort of the first time that a reflection of our lives beamed into the living rooms of New Zealand and told a very different story than they might otherwise have expected to see. And it ended up earning itself 5 nominations in our Film and Television Awards in 1987. And one of those nominations had me as a finalist for Best Actress. Well, I was absolutely delighted, as you could imagine. And I didn't win, but I did win. I won because my peers in the industry at that time decided to nominate me in the gender to which I identified. And that was the first time that had sort of happened for me at that kind of level, and it showed an element of respect for who I was. I didn't need to win some plastic trophy to go and pop on my mantelpiece. That winning, the fact that they identified very respectfully the gender in which I identified, was my Oscar. And it filled me with a huge amount of I don't know, I felt encouraged, my esteem rose, I felt that I was sort of validated in lots of ways. Just a small thing, I know, but it meant the world to someone like me. I did a few more other television roles in major TV series and things like that, and yes, I was typecast either as a lady of the night or some kind of trans person or whatever. Interesting characters to explore, and a wonderful opportunity. And so my profile in the public eye was rising, and I became more identified as Georgina Beyer, an out transsexual, etc. like that. But I went to go and audition for another magazine, glossy program or series that went on television called Gloss, and it was about a magazine and all the glamour and everything in it. And I went to go and audition for it, and I knew the director from my close to home days. Janice Finn was her name, and I went into Janice's office and said, "Oh, I've come to audition for the role of Magda," and everything like that. And Janice very kindly, but also harshly, in some ways, said, "Look, Georgina, I know you'd be capable of doing this, but I don't think New Zealand could see you as mother of 4. Okay, so the message there was you're now identified as a trans person, and so the country wouldn't believe a character that would be a mother and a wife and all of that sort of thing." The world's changed a lot since then, I have to say, but so I had to give that one away. I moved to a small town in a region called the Wairarapa, which is a region northeast of Wellington, our capital city in the North Island. I moved to a small town called Carterton. And I won't give you all the preamble as to how I ended up going from the glamour life of the city and, you know, entertainment and all of that sort of thing to suddenly finding myself in a rural area. I went on to a government-funded training scheme, a life skills course at the local community centre in Carterton. Purpose being that I thought, okay, maybe it's about time I picked up some skills that might give me more realistic employment. I had lived in a sort of, you know, a glamour world which wasn't going to be sustainable as far as career is concerned. So I thought I'll pick up a few sort of practical skills in that regard. They had a drama element on this course, and after I had finished my 20 weeks, I ended up being a tutor of that drama course. And so that's something I hadn't done before, but I was capable of doing, and I was mentored by in fact, a chap called George Webby, who had been a tutor at the New Zealand Drama School, so that was helpful to pick up that, and he shared some of his resources with me in order that I could deliver. And we were teaching drama on this course, not so much to teach them to become actors or anything. It was about learning to imagine and tell stories of your own experience. It helped them to be expressive, and it gave them permission and it didn't just have to be about acting or writing plays. We had to put a production on at the end of the 20-week run of the whole life skills course, and it just gave them a way of being able to express how they felt about their place in society at that time. They were usually sort of down and out, hopeless young people, and it came out with some very good stuff. While at the community centre, where we operated out from, I became interested in the work of the community centre. And in 1991, we had a particularly severe budget that was delivered by our then Finance Minister, Ruth Richardson, and it's commonly called the mother of all budgets. And in that budget, they wiped 25% off all welfare benefits in the country. And that was devastating to the poor and the vulnerable that needed the assistance. And we still suffer from the effects of that. It's now intergenerational of that cut in those days. But more immediately then in 91, in our community, a little bit of homelessness started to happen. And this was sort of unheard of in a town like Carterton. And so we as a community centre rallied around to try and address the immediate situation for some of these people. And we approached our local district council to ask if they would give us some assistance with a powered caravan site at their council-owned caravan park. Reason being, we had been donated a very good a caravan, and we were going to temporarily put a person in there while we sorted out their proper needs and things with the authorities, and it was just very temporary. It wasn't meant to be forever, but it was better than sleeping under trees or under a bridge or down the park or whatever, which was concerning local residents in the area. Our council turned us down. They said, no, that is a social responsibility of central government and not of local government. I thought, you cheap bastards, for God's sake, we only want to help an issue that's happening in your town, and you're not going to, help us in this regard. Anyhow, we did go about still assisting these people, and without the help of the council. But then in 1992 were the local body elections, and somebody in the community centre suggested that I should run for the council because I had been pushed out front during our campaign to get some assistance from the council as the mouthpiece and the spokesperson, and I seem to have acquitted myself quite well, and they thought that I'd be good on the council. And so I didn't think for a minute that I would be successful, not at all, but we knew that it would be a good platform for us to part some criticism at local authority, and also to make our community more aware of some of the social issues beyond what we had just recently experienced. And so it was going to be a good vehicle for doing that on the hustings. I ran on a ticket with a retired vicar, and so there were lots of actress and vicar jokes, and that went on, and people sort of rather, enjoyed that. I missed out on being elected in that election by 14 votes, and I thought I'd done very well. I mean, here's someone who arrived in the town in 1990, this sort of exotic creature, and I thought missing out by 14 votes, that's not bad for a first go, given all my background, which is well known to people. At that time, I never heard any of that. You can't expect people to vote you into public office unless they know everything there is to know about you. And of course, I had quite a story behind me. And I didn't want to be peeled like an onion by the media as all of my lurid and colourful past was revealed. So I thought, I'll just put it all out there, and then people can make up their own minds as to whether or not I'm a worthy enough person to be a representative on their council. A newly elected councillor after that election, actually the local Baptist minister, got redeployed in his ministry to another city, so he only attended 2 meetings, and then there was a vacancy on council when he resigned. It was too soon after the election to leave it vacant, and by convention, the next highest polling candidate could have been appointed. But no, the council chose to do a by-election. Carterton district is a small district. Its rate take each year was about $5 million, so not a lot in the scheme of things. 25% of $25,000 constituted approximately 1% of rates, and the council was prepared to go and throw $15,000 at a by-election, just so they could put all the prevention they could of someone like me getting in. And so 4 other candidates were put up in the by-election, and of course I stood. And so they shared half the votes and I got the rest. And that was essentially the local urban ward saying, council, you got her anyhow, and you should have just put her in there in the first place. And, and there I was. And there's a wonderful photo in our local newspaper in the Wairarapa of me in the foreground swearing my oath of office, and the mayor, the deputy mayor, and the chief executive are sitting on the dais behind me with the most glum, dour faces. Oh my God, what is happening? Oh my God. And it was really quite humorous to sort of see that. Well, I'm proudly there reading my oath of office. Okay, so I'm sitting at the council table. There was only one other woman on that council table. She was just glad to see another skirt in the chamber, and somewhat relieved, and that I was there. However, I was isolated, I was ignored, I wasn't part of the decision-making group really, except when it came to a vote. I had never known, I had to go and swat up very quickly on the functions of the council, our statutory legal obligations, etc. like that too, because no one hands you the handbook on how to do this stuff. And I came, I got familiar with all of that. I did pay a lot of attention to my constituency, and that was good, and take, and try to put their issues across at the table. But essentially, I was sort of largely ignored, which was an easy thing for them to do, except there was a new Act of Parliament called the Resource Management Act, and one of the requirements of the Resource Management Act was that local councils had to go and consult with their local Maori tribe on everything to do with resource management around the area. It was a new thing for New Zealand at that time, and all councils had to establish a consultative procedure with local iwi, as we call it. I was the first Māori ever to have been elected to the Carterton District Council, and in their absolute arrogance and ignorance at the same time, they turned round to the only brown face sitting at the table ever and asked if I would run away and go and do all the workshops, etc., to come up with a draft policy for the council to consider on this requirement of the Resource Management Act. I took the opportunity and ran with it, and I did go around to all the workshops, and I worked very conscientiously on trying to develop this policy that I could present to the council as a draft proposal for them. And except for some amendments since to keep up with changing times, that policy still stands in that council. They agreed to it. Interestingly enough, of course, when we had agreed on the policy but hadn't affirmed it in the council at that time, as they were about to go and do, I said, well, actually, don't you think we better go and show this and discuss this with the local iwi? And so we went out to our local Māori marae, a sort of tribal area, and the council and its predecessors had never been out to that marae for over 100 years. That's how respected Māori were in that area at that time. And so I had to, luckily I had done 1 year of a Māori performing arts course at our local polytechnic in about 1991. So I had scant knowledge, I would put it that way, on what they call tikanga Māori, and I knew a little bit of te reo Māori, the language, and enough to get me through what they call a pōwhiri, which is sort of a welcome, a very, actually Harry and Meghan have just had quite a bit of that while I've been in New Zealand. So suddenly, I became the all-knowledgeable one. I suppose what I'm getting at is I earned some cred, and that's why I took the opportunity to do that. And I think after a couple of years of them getting used to me being at the table, seeing that I was of no particular threat at all, that actually I was a good conscientious councillor, and I did my work well, and I read all the stuff, and da-da-da-da-da, and all of that sort of thing. I was trying to prove that I was worthy to be there, and also a good representative. A cheeky manager came up to me in about late 1994, and he said to me, you know what, we've got the elections again next year in 95, you should have a go at the mayoralty. I said, are you kidding me? I'm only just getting settled in as being a councillor. I haven't even done a full term yet. Remember, I came in a by-election, so I didn't even start. He said, no, because the word I'm hearing around out there is they like you. They like you very much out there in the community, and I think you could give it a shot at least anyhow. Well, another nothing ventured, nothing gained, let's have a go. And of course you can stand, well in New Zealand at least anyhow, you can stand for mayoralty and as a councillor. If you miss out on the mayoralty, you may be likely to be re-elected as a councillor. And I felt confident that that at least would happen. So what's the harm in having a go at the mayoralty? And I had to actually take 3 months leave of absence from the council in 1995 because I thought, okay, going to run for the mayoralty, how the hell am I going to pay for it, for the campaigning and things like that? Yes, there was a little bit of fundraising done, but it wasn't going to make it as far as campaigning for mayoralty. But I got, luckily enough, a play in Auckland came along and I got a large role in it, and I decided to take that up because it was going to pay me something like $5,000 or something, and that would be very helpful for me at that time in helping for my mayoral campaign. And so that's what I did, and of course the rest is history. We had our election, and I ended up becoming the Mayor of Carterton. And when I was rung up by the electoral officer and given the results on election night, and he rang up, and the first thing he sort of said, he said, "Congratulations, Your Worship. You are now the Mayor of Carterton." And I sort of, are you joking? Is this for real? You're not having me on, are you? But no, it was for real. And I put the phone down, and I sat there, and I thought, oh my goodness me, what the hell do I do now? Oh God, I've got it, Be careful what you wish for. And it sort of came, it was incredible. And of course the media attention was intense after that, because they also go, "You're the first, transsexual mayor that we've ever had in New Zealand." And then it was discovered that I was the first transsexual mayor that had been elected, in a proper legitimate election in the world. And I said, oh no, surely not, there must be somebody else. But nobody threw their hands up around the world to say, oh no, I was. And so it was taken with tacit approval that that was the case. So of course the curiosity of the media about all of that, the more wanting to know about my life and all of that sort of thing came along, and I was very open and very honest, and I responded to anything and everything. I had nothing to hide. And that was about being able to liberate myself from any chains that might have, one could put around one, in those days. So everybody knew, and I was reinforcing it by saying, yeah, that's right, I was in the sex industry, I did take drugs, and da-da-da-da-da, and all of that, but that was then, and this is now. And now I have been given the incredible honour and privilege by my community to be their number one citizen, and I intend to do that job to the absolute best of my ability, and I did. I was relentless at it. I loved it. When I realised what was at my fingertips, able to change just my small, progress things, and I believed in participatory democracy, and I wanted people to be involved, because councils are these things that are there, all they do is suck money out of us and never really an explanation why. And I wanted them to be involved, because we can't, otherwise we just operate at some level up here and just sort of down there. No, I wanted them up there, of course, to the shock horror of my council, that I sort of wanted this participation. And that's what people in the community loved about it. I made it easy, I made it accessible, I demystified submission processes and things like that. And I've got a wonderful example of a young boy, and I wanted young people to be involved, of a young boy who had written a letter to me. I'm sure his parents were standing over his shoulder about an unsealed part of their road which they wanted sealed. And I was so impressed by this letter that I asked the parents if they would be happy to bring their son to come to the council to make an oral submission. And they said, and they got all sort of, what the hell is that about? What do we do there? I said, all I want him to do is to come to council and to read his letter. That is an oral submission. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. And so off we did. I neglected to tell him that I'd phoned the local newspaper and the national newspaper and Dominion Post, because I wanted to make an example of him, of a young lad practicing democracy and participating. And he came and he ended up on the front pages of the newspaper and delivering a submission. Not only that, to the shock horror of the councillors, I let the family stay in the chamber while we deliberated over this particular matter, because I already knew what the answer was, and but to be there and watch it working and to see the results of his efforts of writing. I, of course, went down the path of compromise. No, you're not going to get the rest of your road sealed because we can't afford it that particular year in the budget, but what we can do, because the issue was the school bus wouldn't go beyond the sealed part of the road, and their houses were down at the metal end of the road. So we just carved out on road reserve a turnaround area at the end for the bus to turn around, so the bus could go down and pick them up and take them off to school without any problem there. And parents weren't very happy because they really did want the road sealed down there, because Mum was getting sick of the dust and everything that was coming off the metal road. Nevertheless, the point was this young lad practiced democracy, and he was put up as an example of a young person doing that. Other things I would do is have children from our senior classes at our primary schools when they were studying civics briefly during their school year, and I would say, right, get them to elect themselves a mayor and council, get them to draft up an agenda for a meeting that they may hold, and then I want them all to come to the chamber, and I will play ratepayer, and we will put the mayor through the investiture process and the chain and the whole bit, and then you will sit down and you will conduct your meeting agenda, and I'll play vexatious ratepayer, and role-playing was what it was doing. And of course their favourite part was the biscuits and cordial afterwards. Most councillors sort of have a bevy and a few canapes and stuff like that, so why not the kids too, if they're going to practice it down there. And the mayoral chain, of course, became a very tangible thing for them, and when they were able to look at it and touch it and see that there were little emblems on them and that were actually the street names of many of the streets around our district, of the former mayors in the when was that council was established in 1887, so there had been a fair few mayors. Just a small example of how I sort of wanted to bring community on board. I'd get a flea in the air from parents, especially on that role play thing of the council saying, what the hell have you done to these kids? My God, they come home and they rave on about the council and they tell us how everything works and everything. And I thought, great, that's exactly what I wanted to have happen. For it to feed back up, that way. Those are just a couple of examples. Yes, of course, we did serious things like the budgets and the roading and the sewerage and the footpaths and all of those sorts of things. I was a very strong advocate for our area regionally with our other local authorities. We had to compete for transport funding, all of those sorts of things all the time. I learnt on the job and I became very good at it. So in 1998, I stood for re-election. I won with a 90% majority, and I had a couple of other candidates standing against me, but I got a 90% majority, so that was nailed. We like you, we want you. Late in 1998, the New Zealand Labour Party came and shoulder-tapped me, and they wanted me to consider being, first of all, becoming a member of the Labour Party, and then to consider being their candidate for the Wairarapa electorate, the 7th largest general seat in the country, a rural seat, rural, conservative, redneck New Zealand. Usually had been a stronghold, is really a stronghold of the New Zealand National Party, which is the centre-right party in our country, so a blue seat through and through. And I hesitated at that opportunity, but I did meet with the then leader of the opposition, the Right Honourable Helen Clark, was of course to become our Prime Minister, and there was one phrase she used in her meeting with him, and she said, "Oh, look, we're looking for star performers, Georgina," and I thought, okay, I'm just a high-profile mayor. You're putting me into an unwinnable seat for Labour, really. You just want to win the party vote. We have a two-vote system, a mixed proportional representation system. Is our electoral system over there, MMP, and really you just want to use my profile and my local popularity in order to just boost party vote for Labour, rather than really wanting my sharp astuteness as a politician. And also it was a bit about identity politics, I guess, at that time. They were into diversity and inclusion. Well, I ticked the boxes on just about all of that. I'm transgender, I'm a transgender woman, I'm a Māori, and so I ticked sort of quite a few of those boxes for them. But in the end, of course, I accepted. I never thought for a minute I would win, but again, as a local mayor, I saw it as a platform again to air some of our more important local issues toward the parliamentary environment while I was on there. So you could have knocked me down with a feather when on election night. In fact, if you watch a documentary about me called Georgina, you could see I just dissolved into tears when I realised I had won the wider upper electorate. We had the largest swing in the country in that electorate, and at that 1999 election, we had a 32% swing to Labour. I won the seat with a 3,000 majority, and we won the party vote as well. And suddenly I found myself to be a member of Parliament. And again, the media said, oh, you're the first transsexual in New Zealand to be a member of Parliament. In fact, we think you're the first transsexual in the world to ever have been elected into Parliament like that. I said, surely not. Oh, for God's sake, there must be somebody else out there. But no one threw their hands in the air. And I sort of rudely suggested, Margaret Thatcher? I don't know. I was being mean, I suppose, at the time. And there we were. Suddenly I was there, and again I had that question in the back of my mind, oh my God, what do I do now? And Parliament was a privileged, incredible experience. I don't want to go back there again. But what I did do in the 8 odd years that I was in Parliament was good. Certainly delivered for my electorate, which is very large, and all of that, new hospitals, our roading and stuff like that. Worked well with the local authorities, of course, because I was so intimately well known with them. And I did get myself involved, and I served on some very interesting select committees, some of them quite relevant to my electorate, others, just relevant to the country. So I served on the Law and Order Select Committee. I chaired the Social Services Select Committee of the Parliament. How ironic, given my attitude towards, for about 3 or 4 years I chaired that Select Committee. And I was on Local Government and Environment Select Committee, the Primary Production Select Committee, and for the very short-lived MMP Review Committee. After every election we have an MMP Review Committee. So that was interesting to be on. I championed 2 particular pieces of social legislation, I suppose you could call it, that were conscience votes. First of all, it was the Prostitution Reform Act, as it has now become. A bill sponsored by my parliamentary colleague Tim Barnett. He's the one to take the credit for bringing that one into Parliament. And it was an interesting debate. That piece of legislation came about because a woman called Catherine Healy, for 30 years, who had left her life as an early childhood teacher to partly work in the sex industry, but also to be supportive of people, of sex workers who worked in the sex industry. And she came up with the idea that there needed to be a law, a reform of prostitution in New Zealand. And so it is she who brought really the Prostitution Reform Act to Parliament, and it was Tim Barnett that sponsored it through into Parliament. And it was just so sort of coincidental that I, as a former sex worker, happened to be in Parliament at the time. And so, of course, I was going to champion the purpose of it. It outraged people, of course, and it outraged many around the world that we would even consider this. It's now since become a world-leading piece of legislation. It was not about condoning prostitution per se. It was certainly about human rights. It was certainly about justice and fairness and occupational health and safety, not just for the sex workers, but anyone who access that industry as a client. because, the advent of STDs, HIV and AIDS, and all of that kind of thing, very important. It also would help to minimise the influence of the criminal elements that tend to run those industries, to bring it out and give it the disinfectant of light, and give it regulation, and to get it under some kind of control and to make it safer for people to practice the industry. There is no point in ignoring that it exists. They don't call it the oldest profession in the world for nothing. We put in various safeguards, protections for under 18-year-olds never to be procured into the industry. Those that did it, unscrupulous adults that might do that, have the book thrown at them. We're very punitive on that. We put in protections around immigration so that we couldn't have people who just flooded to New Zealand to work in a sex industry, not at all. That made sense. It has survived for a long time now in the Parliament, and it's highly unlikely it will ever be repealed, but what is likely to happen is that it will adjust with the changing times. So these days, modern issues such as sex trafficking, people trafficking, child trafficking, all of that sort of thing, we have to adapt and amend our Act as necessary to make sure that we don't become one of those countries where that could easily happen. So I still stand firm by the Prostitution Reform Act. Others do not, of course. Some countries go more punitive. So you want to fill your jails up, do you really, on something that's going to continue anyhow? That's one thing. The other piece of legislation, of course, that was important for us was civil unions. And that was a venal, nasty debate. New Zealand had had homosexual law reform pass in 1986. What didn't pass, which should have done at the same time, was also the human rights associated with that. That didn't happen until 1993 under 1993 under a national government at that time, particularly an MP called Catherine O'Regan, included Section 21 of the Human Rights Act in New Zealand, grounds upon which you cannot be discriminated against. It really should have happened at the same time of homosexual law reform, but that had been such a venal, nasty, divisive debate that we were just lucky that we had homosexuality decriminalised. More recently, in fact, in the last year, all men who were convicted of homosexual acts prior to the 1986 reforms had their convictions erased off the books entirely last year. Absolutely appropriate thing to do. Took too long to do it, frankly. And because it destroyed many lives, those convictions, in many ways. That has been addressed. Civil unions, after a mean, nasty debate, and I had great battles with one of our high-profile evangelical churches, the Destiny Church, and its leader, Brian Tamaki, and I had some real knock-em-down, drag-em-out debates. But all I needed to do was press his buttons, and he hung himself. So that was all very easy to do. It passed with a reasonable majority, as opposed to prostitution reform, which didn't. It passed because of one abstention. You couldn't get much slimmer than that. And both of those pieces of legislation have survived to this day. And when civil unions passed, about 10 years later, maybe a little less, can't remember the year exactly, a lady called Louisa Wall, an MP in our Parliament, a lesbian MP in our Parliament, she presented marriage equality into our Parliament, and that passed with a very good majority, really, and with very little resistance from the mainstream public. We squealed from the usual suspects. Otherwise, they died away. And from polling, a majority of the country was saying, just do it. Come on, just do it. So if we hadn't perhaps had civil unions first, we would rather have had marriage then, and except for the name civil unions,
That's exactly what it was. Marriage by another name. But now we have marriage equality, and it hasn't superseded civil unions. That still exists. Civil unions provided the fact that same-sex couples could have a solemnised and recognised marriage-type relationship, and it was open to everybody. Anybody can have including same-sex. So that was sort of the subtle difference between that and marriage. I was never a great fan of marriage myself. I regard it as having a religious connotation to it, the sanction of the church, and that kind of thing. I don't really care about that, because marriage, what is it? It is actually a civil union. It's a civil thing. You go and sign a registration, a certificate. That's the legal part of marriage. That's what solemnises it. Marriage just has this sort of, religious halo over it. And what is marriage for the church? A very, very long-term recruitment process forever and forever as you begat and begat and begat and begat. I hope I'm not offending anyone with that kind of comment, but, that's sort of what it is, really. So those are my contributions in Parliament, sort of, to be highlighted, amongst other things. I also, participated in legislation I was vehemently opposed to supporting. And I found myself between a rock and a hard place on one piece of legislation. We call it the Foreshore and Seabed. I won't bore you with how that works and what that exactly was about, but it was to do with a sort of Māori treaty issues, and I was forced in the end to having to vote in favour of it when I wanted to vote against it, because as Māori called it at that time, the greatest land confiscation in the entire history of the country, and I had to play a party of it. But you have your wins and you have your losses, and you don't always get there. I left Parliament in 2007. I actually wanted to leave in 2005 at that election, but decided after being persuaded to stay on for a bit longer. I wasn't being offered any promotion. I had achieved all I needed to achieve and delivered to my electorate. I had participated in some fairly good, campaigns and legislations while in Parliament, and because promotion wasn't in the offing, I decided, what the hell am I staying here for? Let's move on. And so I did. People said, oh God, you could still be there now if I wanted to, and yes, I could be. But what, sitting on my backside, taking the money and the perks, doing minimal amount of work? That lacks integrity, frankly. And so I just moved on. There's somebody else that wants to get in there and do their thing, and why not give them an opportunity? So that's sort of really, if I can sum it up there, there's probably more detail I could give you on things, but it might be preferable, Charles, if you ask me a few of those questions and we get the audience to ask. But well, that's sort of in a nutshell.
Well, I think you should just give a round of applause for that story.
Cheers.
Fascinating story, just genuinely fascinating. And as I said, I want to get as many of you asking questions as possible, so I'm just going to ask one, almost as if I'm in the audience, but fortunately because I'm up here, I get the priority. But just about what you said, twice moving from urban to slightly less urban in Carterton, so from Auckland to Carterton,
yes.
Then from Carterton to Wairarapa
in the same place.
Yeah. So, and I just picking up on some of the things you said. So you said you were leaving this sort of glamour world and becoming almost an exotic creature to some of these people. And I was just thinking, especially for us now, in a really polarized world, whereby you have quite divisive opinions out there, you clearly have gone into places which were deeply conservative, in which probably many people hadn't encountered trans people before, but you've managed to win people over and you've managed to change opinions. So I was just wondering whether you could reflect a little bit on that. How do we go and do that in a society which can, especially with Trump and Brexit, feel like it's becoming quite closed and people are becoming set in their ways?
I think when you are confident with being who you are when you realise how liberating it is just to be yourself, it gave me, anyhow, a certain amount of courage, bravado even, to just dive into things that might be considered, because I just didn't think of myself as being threatening in any way. In a rural conservative place like the Wairarapa, like Carterton, I discovered that people like them would spot a fake at 50 paces. They didn't find a fake in me. They found someone who was honest, straight up, didn't hide anything about it, and sincere and genuine, and a good worker, and she tries hard, and so we're going to back her. So I think really the story might not be so much about me and my exoticness, but about them. That's an interesting dynamic that happened there. So they knew all about my lurid and colourful past and could put it there and sort of say, yep, she's lived a bit of life, haven't we all? You know, now let's focus on her ability, her intelligence, her effectiveness, all the things we should all be recognised for, as opposed to being, you know, then constantly, you know, backs against the wall, what's between your legs, you know, that kind of thing, because it stops there. I have to say, Charles, that some of the credibility issues that I came across was because of that very thing, that people who were uncomfortable around a trans person like myself, if they could just loosen up a bit and stop being so arrogant as to think that I want to get into their pants, and then stop wondering what's in mine, perhaps we could actually, you know, have a bit more respect for each other in other ways. How does this help globally? Well, you know, today in this world, I'm very concerned. I certainly am very concerned for the 1.4 million trans people in the United States of America right now. Last week, of course, some of you may be aware that out of the White House came a suggestion that as far as gender identity is concerned, if you are born with a penis or if you're born with a vagina, you are either going to be a boy or a girl. Nothing else exists. And the hashtag which has come out of this from the transgender community and their allies is we will not be erased. And we will not be erased. We can't be erased. Trans has existed for millennia in one way or another. You look into our ethnic societies, they have it in there. You look in some of the religions, Hindu, for example. I had the privilege of going to Nepal at the invitation of one of the out gay MPs called Sunil Babu Pant, and he was on their Human Rights Committee of their parliament, and they were charged with drafting the human rights chapter of their new constitution, where they were going to include the third gender to be protected in their constitution. They're the first country in the world to have achieved that. India followed soon after. The reason why they have this thing for the third gender is that in their religion, Shiva, for example, a god, a deity, and all of that, transgenders in their mythologies all the time. And it's not the only religion where that can sort of happen. And so transgender people over there in India, the Hirshas and others like that, in their religious ceremonies, they're made deities. And then they're sent back to being untouchables. You know, so there is a bit of disparity there. So no one can erase the fact that we exist. I just think there's a huge lack of understanding, and I have great cynicism about some of the so-called medical expertise that comes out and tells you, oh no, it's all about DNA and chromosomes and stuff like that. Maybe it is to a degree, that, you know, that it can be. What they forget about is the head and the heart and where we are at as people. I don't know what the fear is about us, frankly. There's something they see as threatening. We mean no harm, in my view, to any other person in this world. We're going to be law-abiding, positive participants in our society, If only you will let us. What is your issue? I think a lot of it comes from religious dogma sometimes, Leviticus, I'm sick of it being thrown at us. It's, it's a fantasy story anyhow, the whole bloody thing, when you look at it. And, but they've made, centuries and centuries out of, making it part of all of our lives and a lot of our history. I understand all of that, but also it oppresses people like us. It dehumanizes us, frankly, and I don't see anything particularly pious about any of that, and in fact contradictory. If I hadn't been able to do the things I do, God only knows, and I like to be a counter-argument just by my mere presence and being to people who would rail against us like that, because I have in my little country anyhow been able to be successful and participate fully in my society without prejudice or discrimination in the modern day. Yes, I had my time, but I overcame it. I set an example. It provided a motivation and an inspiration for other trans people around the world to pursue their desired endeavours in life, whether it be in public office. If you try, and if you fail, get up and try again. We are as competent at being in those positions as anyone. And now we have trans people who are doctors, they are surgeons, they are lawyers, they are academics, they are everywhere. And, so we are able to make our contributions to society. What is the point of making us burdens? That has a huge social cost in more ways than one. As for the fact that the incredible rate of suicide and depression and all of that is caused by this hatred, frankly, that pours out from some people is a crime against humanity, in my view, and it needs to be addressed. And I now, I've spent the last 5 years being extraordinarily ill with chronic end-stage renal failure. I almost died, but I was given a life again by a kidney transplant that I had last year. When my donor offered me the kidney, he said, "You know why I want to do this? Because we're not finished with you yet, Georgina. You've got more to do." And I had gone to a very dark place. I was ready to let go and pass away, having felt sort of satisfied that I'd had a pretty good life, really, at the end of the day. And I could let it go. How he had that premonition, I have no idea, because here I am with you tonight. Here I was last week at Oxford. Here I was yesterday at the House of Lords with Lord Michael Cashman and a few other lords and baronesses and things, discussing our trans and rainbow issues with those people. I have the privilege of being able to go there to help my trans family around the world where they're not happening, and I've come up with an idea that I need to become some kind of United Nations ambassador for trans and rainbow communities around the world. And indeed there is a part of the United Nations called UN Elders. It has people such as former President Mary Robinson, it has Kofi Annan, it has and some other very prominent people, but there's no one that I can identify as being overtly rainbow or trans. And although we have human rights lawyers and people like that on there, and let's have a go there, because I think that's where my future has got to lie. I don't want to go back into Parliament and politics and things like that, but I do want to try and do more specifically. And not just for our trans and rainbow community, actually for significant minorities around the world who are suffering. I mean, I worry about things such as where are our trans and rainbow people who are part of the huge millions of displaced peoples from theatres of war, from Myanmar, from, all of those sorts of things? Where are their safe havens? How are they going to be safe in the countries where they do find themselves settled? I mean, there's just issues like that I think we could get our teeth into, and I don't know if anyone particularly specifically looks at the rainbow community, and I use that in a very general term. Around the world.
Well, thank you for, there are so many other questions which I could pose, but I'm going to quickly go ahead. We've got about 5 or 7 minutes or so just to take a few questions. So does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? anyone at all. Perfect, yeah.
What did you do immediately after you left Parliament?
Oh, yeah, okay. Immediately after I left Parliament, I had a play to do in Dunedin, a city in the South Island of New Zealand. And just to wind back a bit, in 2005, I found myself on Dancing with the Stars. Strictly Come Dancing, you call it here, on Dancing with the Stars. I survived halfway through the show before I got kicked off, so I thought that was pretty good. And so there was this play called 6 Dance Lessons in 6 Weeks. It was a relatively new American play, and they were staging it down at the Fortune Theatre in Dunedin. And so I decided to do it, something completely different. What I didn't realise, of course, was, Georgina, it's been an awfully long time since you committed a script to memory, and this was a 2-handle play of 72 pages, and I struggled very much trying to retain all that script. So that's sort of what I did immediately after I left Parliament. So that was fine. And then I thought, and of course I stupidly thought that I would find it easy to get work, perhaps be put on boards and things like that. Oh no, none of that happened. And none of my former parliamentary colleagues sort of helped in that regard. She's gone, that's it. Usually there's a bit of, they help out your colleague to get on this board and that board, and they pay quite well. And all of that. Well, long story short, I essentially found myself unemployed. I did briefly work in a jeweller's until I got sacked, because we had this law in New Zealand whereby after 90 days the employer could sack you if they weren't sort of satisfied. And so we loosely call it the 90-day fire at will clause. And I got caught up in that because I had the mere suggestion that I was going to run in the 2010 mayoral election for Masterton, a city in my former Wairarapa electorate, and when the local newspaper ran a poll with the incumbent mayor and 3 other declared candidates, I came out with 62% rating of being the preferred mayor. At the next election, the manager of the shop sort of said, "Oh, so you're going to be the mayor of Marston?" And I said, "Well, the election isn't for a while yet, and no one can assume that one's going to win it until you've actually won it. So, but that's the intention, to have a go." And, "Oh, so you won't be working here then?" I said, "Well, unlikely, if I was lucky enough to win." And on the grounds of that, he sacked me. And so that was that. I fell into a period of unemployment. I had to live off my reserves and my resources until they ran out. And actually, it was forced to a point of having to go and register unemployed. And when I went into the local social welfare office, which was in my former electorate, and the last time I had been in that office, I was the local MP, and I was escorting my leader, the Prime Minister, through those offices, and now I was turning up to register unemployed. One of the most humiliating things I've ever had to do in my life at that point, but push had come to shove. And then I fell ill with this chronic end-stage renal failure, which was devastating, obviously, health-wise, but it also wiped me entirely financially. And that has been very difficult. Very difficult, and that's why it was sort of easy to think, I can let it all go now because I'm sick of struggling. I'm sick of having to, get up off the ground again and off again. And then you wonderful people over here, after my kidney transplant, which was life-saving, and I sort of felt I now need to honour that incredible gift and not throw it away so easily. And then here I am, and so I'm on an upward trend again, I hope, and it's my intention, and I now see a new vocation, I think, for me, on a much wider scale. But I just can't dismiss that what I have done in my life, and that is now going to be useful, I hope, for more people. I think that's where I should go. And so, that's all looking good again.
Fantastic. I think just one more, that's okay. Yeah, at the back there.
Well, thank you so much. I'm from the Muffled Barrels Army, and guess where I'm from. A lot of these really progressive changes actually come from the judiciary, not from the political class. What are your observations on how that dynamic will go, especially now in the United States?
Oh God, don't Kavanaugh. And am I right in thinking that there's also been another retirement or something off the Supreme Court in America? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Oh, no, I agree with that. America, in some respects, I mean, it's almost a lost cause at the moment. I mean, I hope the midterms start to turn things around. That would be delightful. The conservative nature of their Supreme Court over there now is of concern, and I know there's a lot of fear through over there. In New Zealand, we haven't had quite the same sort of issues. We're getting a few judgments coming out that I have to say I haven't been following it completely closely over there. But on the other hand, we have a very good new Minister of Justice in Andrew Little, and he's pushing through some quite good stuff that he's looking at there at the moment. We have here in the UK at the moment has been a debate around the GRA. Oh God, what's that? There's something or other. Gender Recognition Act. Yes, and this consultation process that they've been going through, which seems to have been very tortuous, and there seems to have been some strong resistance from some radical feminists. And we are having the same legislation, but it's in our Births, Deaths and Marriages Registration Act that's occurring over there. And the contrast between what will be and has been a venal battle over here, over there it's up for a second reading shortly, and it's an amendment really to our Births, Deaths and Marriages to have the documentation, identity and all of that kind of thing done rather than by a family court situation, more simply as a statutory declaration of changing the identity on your doctor's documents in the gender to which you identify. We are lucky at the moment that we have a government that is going to be amenable, and a parliament, I think, just in general, who is happy to look at that. So our checks and balances, I think, as far as our parliament and our judiciary, of course, they're separate, in that sense, is more positive than it is elsewhere, or not everywhere, but in many other countries. How do we deal with a situation like the US and that conservative thing? It really does. I mean, you made the distinction between the judiciary and the political class, etc. Over there, of course, an administration comes, an administration will eventually go. But those Supreme Court appointments are for life, and I think that's a dangerous situation to be in. To have, because what are we going to? Are they going to have a conservative, Supreme Court for many, many years to come? So even if Trump eventually is no longer in power, it doesn't alter what's been left there, and I think that's a dangerous thing. I don't think I answered your question at all, because it's a complex one and it's difficult. And I've been out of the loop really somewhat. I'm just getting back in the loop again. But I just have a feeling that those of us around the world who have the ability to bring pressure to bear on countries just by advocacy in the right forums around the world, the United Nations is sometimes somewhat impotent, it seems, in many areas, but it is an organisation that I think we need to nurture as opposed to just let it dissolve away and be nothing, and not have the influence that it can have, and in fact be a bit more strong. I have to say that there has been a simmering of discontent for quite a while now from right-wingers, extreme right-wing people, that they have bit their lip while all of this so-called PC stuff has been happening. I wish they would look at it another way, that some of the liberation that has occurred for people who have been able to now enjoy their human rights and those sorts of things has been far more of a positive contribution to our societies in general than not. I think people are feared they are losing some kind of power that they have over us, rather than welcoming in the diversity of our worlds. War conflicts and things are beyond your and my control in many ways. It usually centres around economics and money and that kind of thing. I fear in Brazil now we're going to see, with a right-wing newly elected president, and some of what is suggested there. I worry again in America, when do we start seeing abortion and all of that start winding back, It's difficult. Another question?
Yeah, we've got time for just one more. Or if not, what we could do is we could finish up, but spend about another 5-10 minutes at the end for any of you, if you want to come up and have a more informal chat. That might be something quite nice to do.
Can I just say one thing in conclusion? As an example, again, a New Zealand example, you might have noticed I'm wearing this brooch. It's a camellia, which was a symbol of women's suffrage in New Zealand in 1893. And New Zealand is celebrating 125 years of women's suffrage, first country in the world to give women the vote. Not the first country in the world to give women the vote and allow them to stand for Parliament at the same time. They weren't allowed to stand for Parliament for about another 15 or so years after women had won the right to vote. But nevertheless, we won the right to vote for women in New Zealand, and then subsequently it went around the world and assisted other jurisdictions to follow up a little while later. It wasn't until actually 1933 that we had our first woman Member of Parliament, Elizabeth McCombs. So it was quite a while after 1893 before we got a woman into Parliament. And when I was presented with this, and I'm the first former woman Member of Parliament to have been presented one, because all the currently sitting women MPs got given one for the celebration this year. I'm the first one to get one because I was coming here, and I thought it would be nice to just wear it at my appearances here, just to show off actually, and to skite. But I have been involved since we launched our 125-year celebrations in March of this year, and I have been involved in the launch and many and varied events around the country celebrating women's suffrage. And I'm very humbled and proud to have been involved, because I find that really is women, including me, in a celebration that could fairly be said to be theirs. But we don't want to miss the point. I think that in order for women to get the vote, it took for men to do it for us. So let's give some credit to the blokes for doing that. And so it just signifies that in my country at least I am treated with great respect, and I am included, and I wish that could be for everybody, for all of us, trans transgender people around the world could experience a similar acceptance. And so I'm a very fortunate person. I'd also like to acknowledge, sorry Charles, in conclusion, that after I was elected to mayoralty in Parliament, I have to acknowledge Vladimir Luxuria, who was the second transgender woman in the world to be elected into the very short-lived Prodi government in Italy, and Anna Grodzka, I think I've got her name correct, in Poland, she was the third, and for a period of time the only one in the world after I had departed from politics, and Vladimir was no longer in government either, and I think she may have retired by now. So what that says is that, and I know even here, I met a lady the other night at a function we had at the New Zealand High Commission who said she'd been running for public office here in the UK. She wasn't successful her first time, and I said, well, don't give up, my dear. Keep on going. Keep persevering. You may make it one day. And I know that there are other transgender people around the world who have been elected to not political office necessarily, but to education boards and so on and so forth, and everything like that. And this is wonderful. And I know and can I also acknowledge that although I may be touted as the first, I had modified that accolade at a conference, a human rights conference the UN held in Montreal some years ago now, where I said, no, I want to modify that to the first out transgender person who had been elected into those positions. You and I don't know if there had been people way before me who may have been elected into office, could never be out. And so I think to honour that possibility is fair enough for me to, just put that a little bit right.
Perfect. Well, all I can say is an enormous thank you for coming up here and for providing such a genuinely fascinating talk about your life and about all these other elements about activism, about the trans community. I hope that you would also, like the audience, would also like to join me in thanking in the traditional way. So can we give a massive round of applause?
Thank you, Charles. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
No problem. And as mentioned, just so that everyone can have a chance to have a chat and pose any questions which they might like to do in a more sort of intimate setting, I'm sure we'll be around for about another 5-10 minutes afterwards to have a conversation.
Before that, I just need to use the bathroom.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful Halloween evening.